So my talk is entitled Practical Radicalism. So on the one hand, we have voice. If you don't have a problem with something, you can try to express your disapproval of it, or I suppose approval of it. And on the other hand, we have exiting. You know, if you don't like the city of Austin, you could head over to Houston and hope for greener pastures. Well, I am proposing a third way. So this is, in fact, the Voice and Exit Conference, and hopefully my proposing of a third way won't get the tomatoes from earlier thrown at me. But you know, we'll give it a shot. And that is called practical radicalism. So the question is, does policy matter? Okay, so a lot of people talk about policies, you know, the various policies that come from local governments or such, and whether or not they matter to people. And there's two ways in which one could approach that question. One is whether or not it matters individually, and in this way, it matters almost not at all, right? So in the aggregate, voice matters a lot because, in fact, in the aggregate, you can get really bad policies such as North Korea, or you can get really good places such as South Korea. But individually, it means almost nothing. All your voices in trying to change policy, trying to affect policy, get drowned out. So it doesn't matter, at least not for most people. So, in fact, people in this space typically tend to indulge their biases. They tend to vote on things that, in fact, probably don't matter in the end, and they tend to be swayed by things that a rational person, at least, wouldn't necessarily be swayed by. And there's an entire book on this issue called The Myth of the Rational Voter by Brian Kaplan, in which he describes, the subtitle, in fact, of this book is Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies. Okay, so what about exiting? Well, the problem with exiting has always been cost, namely that exiting Walmart is cheap, but exiting a lot of the typical things that are provided by industries and in monopolistic situations, or indeed by government, is much more expensive. It's very difficult to exit having to deal with the TSA. You'd have to get in your car and drive across the country or perhaps the Pacific Ocean, and that's pretty hard. So policies, unfortunately, are continually centralizing. So first, you know, here is, in fact, Austin, Texas, and here is the state of Texas. And policies have been continually moving away from the local situation where the problem or the issue exists that should be looked at from a policy perspective, and are becoming federal. And I think this is not necessarily a good trend. So what about exiting? Exiting is becoming higher and higher cost. It might be easy to exit Austin and move to Houston, but it's not going to be easy to exit the United States. Just think about all the normal costs you'd have to incur to do it, but then there's also all the costs that you don't necessarily think about. For example, all your friends and family, you're not going to be so far away from them. You understand the culture, you understand the way we use language, you understand the way the supermarket is laid out here, and you won't understand that if you move to Japan. So, but what I'm suggesting is not to despair, okay? There is another option. So, let's say you walked into Barnes & Noble, and for whatever reason, you didn't like the service, you didn't like the selection. Well, you could leave and walk into Borders, or at least you could until recently. And well, let's say you have more problems. Let's say you have all these problems. So you get angry, you write letters, you speak to the manager, and this is essentially what could be done in the past. Or today, you can say, what an opportunity. Start Amazon.com, change the whole system, fix the problem, and make billions on the side for yourself. So this is what I'm, in a nutshell, suggesting is the third way. Now, when you act entrepreneurially using this approach, you've become a practical radicalist. Now, let's be a little rigorous here. What do we mean by practical and radicalism? So first, let's address the radicalism side of this equation. We want to address big problems that are likely to produce big returns or fail. And why? Because bigger problems allows for more risk. And if you're doing something that's more novel, more different, you can, and of course it's more inherently risky, the only way you're really going to be able to achieve that is by doing this on a big scale. Because then if you're successful, you're going to make and create a lot of value. And that allows you to take more risk. And also, the market won't be saturated by people already doing this, okay? Actually, if you speak to enough venture capitalists, you realize that most of the stuff they want to hear is the person who comes in afterwards talking about video sharing website number 542, rather than somebody who has an actually novel idea. So, also using technology, old technology, in new and diverse ways. It reduces risk, it reduces time and complexity of the endeavor, and it requires less upfront capital, which is, of course, very important. And finally, on the practical side, grounding your idea in reality. Now, this is kind of the critical piece, economic, practical, and social realities, and most people don't seem to have this one. Okay? Most radical ideas are just radical and not practical. So, what I'm suggesting is combining the two is actually very important and critical to making this work. Now, where did this idea come from? Who am I to stand up here and talk to you about practical radicalism and why you should embrace it? Well, I have my own venture is called Blue Seed. We are, in fact, Silicon Valley's international startup community. It's our tagline, in fact. And we're stationing 1,000 entrepreneurs on a stationary ship 12 miles off the coast of the US, outside of the US's jurisdiction, with easy access to Silicon Valley. Okay, why are we doing this? Well, when you go out there on a ship that's flagged to a country that's not the US, then you can do various different things. For example, you can earn an income, you can start a company, you can work on that ship, whereas in Silicon Valley itself, unless you have a work permit, you can't do that. And currently, there is no work permit for people who want to start companies in Silicon Valley or anywhere in the United States. There is no startup visa. You can get a visa if you want to go work for Yahoo or for Google, but you cannot get a visa if you want to start your own company. I think that's a crime. So I decided to try and change that issue, but not by going to Washington and beating my head against a brick wall, which is what people do in Washington, unless they make a lot of money, which people also do that. But by actually just saying, all right, what is a solution that one can practically come up with today that is kind of radical and can actually solve this problem? So you can travel back and forth from Silicon Valley on what's known as a tourist visa, and coincidentally enough, a tourist visa is a lot easier to get than a work visa. Those are attainable by immigrants who are coming to work on startups. And once you're 12 miles offshore and you travel using this business and tourist visa, you have effectively opened the entire world and Silicon Valley to it, connecting them and allowing for the growth and creation of a lot of companies, a lot of technologies, a lot of jobs, a lot of economic progress that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So, what exactly are we doing? We're adding value to startups. Here's just a small list of some of the ones that have come to us already. And in return for equity, so when we help them to do better, they provide us with equity. That equity becomes more valuable in their companies, and we ultimately do better ourselves. So far, we've had a lot of press. We've been all over the news, and we've had over 348 companies come to us from, I think it's 68 different countries around the world, and some of them are represented there. In fact, number one, about a quarter of it is the United States, and a lot of people there want to come into our community to connect with these companies, to connect with these individuals from around the world, add creativity to their companies before they continue their growth on land. So far, we have about a few $100,000 of investments from various venture capitalists around Silicon Valley, and we are progressing. So, yes, the answer is this approach works. And it can work for you. Yes, right there, you in the audience, that's right. And why can it work for you? Well, if you're listening, you're more interested in politics, economics, social issues, etc., emergent order, than virtually anyone else. You are the 1%. Okay? You just don't realize it yet, until now. So, what are some good examples of practical, radical companies? Well, here's one, SpaceX. It's the first, one of the first commercial space ventures. And they are addressing huge inefficiencies in space travel by using existing technology that's been repurposed from the ground up for cost control rather than what NASA or the European Space Agency tends to do, which is, well, the opposite of cost control. So it's understood that their biggest initial customer, though, was Uncle Sam. this is where the practical part comes in. So if they wanted to start off and just start selling tickets to go to space, well, that might not have worked so well, but they realize the biggest customer currently is the US government. Why not undercut NASA? And in fact, that's what they've been doing. And of course, my own company is a great example. We're solving two huge problems. One is the entrepreneurial visa, or the non-existence of it. And the other is creating an entire community with 1,000 entrepreneurs, all geared towards and dedicated towards growing their companies to the point where it makes sense for them to move onshore. And we're using existing frameworks, that is, a used cruise ship, the existing legal frameworks of the United States and its immigrations and customs policies. And we're built from the ground up with an understanding of the political realities that surround a radical and practical company like our own. Now, digging just a little bit deeper, we never had a problem thinking big. Right here is, in fact, one of the first mock designs, and as you can see, it definitely wouldn't float, that's for sure. And if it did, I don't think anybody would want to live there. It's pretty dangerous looking. Here's some other ones. Those we got almost for free, by the way. But it took a lot of time for us to sort of add in all the other elements. For example, we went from first thinking about a custom build to then thinking about buying a used ship, and finally leasing a used ship. It took us a while to really hammer home that we need to make this radical idea more practical in order for it to get launched and off the ground. And of course, focusing down very specifically on startups, creating a community, an entire environment that's not catering to people who are, providing services for advertisements or something like that, or just wanting to live there, but instead a community focused around the growth of these startups. Now, what are some almost good examples? Well, I don't mean to step on Mike Gibson's toes. In fact, I consider him a friend. But Coursera and Udacity, these are some of the educational startups that have come up recently. I think they have a big problem, which is really not thinking big enough. And why are they not thinking big enough? Well, the elephant in the room when it comes to education is the elementary, middle, and high school education. And so far, a lot of these are not really addressing that market. So they're not really grounded in the practical realities of what education is, namely the signaling model of education, what education really provides. Is it really about providing an education, or is it providing that certificate that says that you were diligent enough to sit in your seat for year after year after year, and that means you're going to be a good worker because you're going to sit in your seat for year after year after year at the company? And, well, they don't seem to have embraced that model. And of course, they don't provide that valuable credential, although some of them are now trying to provide a valuable credential, but they're not quite there yet. And they don't provide what is perhaps the most important element of the public school educational system today, namely a daycare. Okay? Think about it. The parents want to leave. They want to go work for their own thing. They have other things to do. They want a place where they can drop their kids off all day. Now, this is what traditional education provides, and that is why it would be very, very difficult for an entirely online educational system to provide that. In fact, I think it just won't really happen in that way. You won't replace public school education. So whatever happens, it will also include the facilities of a daycare. And I think when it does this and incorporates this, then these sorts of companies will be practical, radical companies. Now, there are tons of opportunities, tons. You have all the tools you need. Like I said, you people are the 1%. You have a better understanding of this. You're more interested in this than almost anybody out there. You will spot the opportunities that other people are not likely to spot. You know what those problems are. You can see it in a way that a lot of other people can't, and that is a great advantage. That's the first big step. And of course, there's healthcare, education, transportation, professional services, legal, all these sort of services that there are many opportunities out there to capture and create a lot of value, and I hope that you're all paying attention in that way. There is no excuse. I recommend having at least a year's worth of savings at a minimum before you embark on such an endeavor, and a thick skin, because you'll get a lot of rejections, and worse. And in the end, it'll be worth it. Okay? So remember, fortune favors the bold. And you get a cabin on board Blue Seed, that was one of our startups, if you are pursuing a practical radical idea. Thank you very much.